I've had to be a bit more cutthroat. So, back in the day, Paul, a lot of people would ask me for advice or they want to jump on a Zoom. I'd be like, cool, that's how the best way to help yourself is by helping others. But it's now got to a point where if somebody asks me for something, I ask this question. It sounds a bit conceited, but I say, and just imagine you reached out to me and said, could you help me with this now? I'd say, Paul, are you looking for free advice? Are you looking for paid coaching?
Neil, good afternoon. Welcome to the show. If I can ask you to start by introducing yourself, please, and tell us what you do.
Yeah, well, first and foremost, thank you very much for having me on board. My name is Neil Bhuyan. I'm the MD and founder of a company called happyselling.io. You may know me from LinkedIn as the Happy Selling Guy. But what I do is I help sales development reps or biz dev reps to become happy sellers. And the way that I do that, Paul, is by providing SDR training or SDR coaching. And I also provide an SDR podcast to help out brand new SDRs. And that's me.
Cool. So, do you want to just quickly outline what an SDR and a BDR is? I obviously know, but for the non-sales people out there, what does that mean?
Really good question, and I love the question. It really depends, the type of company or sales team they're working with. But if we think about a sales cycle, and at the beginning of a sales cycle, where we're trying to reach out to people that don't know who we are or what our product is, an SDR is the first line of defense where they reach out to cold prospects to educate, evangelize, and hopefully book a meeting to then move forward to show the solution for a biz. So they're at the beginning of the sales cycle, but I feel one of the most important parts of the sales cycle from an outbound perspective.
I 100% agree. Having done my own cold calling and prospecting myself back in the year 2000, 2001, that was a long time ago, I understand how difficult it is. And I think that it's a very different role now compared to what it was years ago because you have some tools and stuff, right? But I think
Yeah,
But you work with individuals that are working to sell to corporates, not consumers, right? So it's not the double glazing salespeople that ring you at home at 9 o'clock at night.
yeah. So anybody working in the B2B space, and primarily the SDRs that I work or coach, work in tech startup and tech sales.
Yeah, yeah, perfect. So look, you possibly had the longest employment history I've ever seen on LinkedIn when I did my research. So I think there
Yeah.
was 23 experiences. Now, what I'd like to understand is how you went from being a warehouse supervisor for DHL to then
Mm.
working in civil service at Wandsworth Borough Council
Yep.
to being a founder and a sales trainer for Happy Selling. How on earth did that journey
Yeah.
happen?
So first off, well done on the homework. I love it when people actually do their homework as well.
Yeah.
You'd be surprised the amount of people when I meet them for the first time and I said, "So what do you know about me?" Like, not too much. And I'm
Okay.
like, "Okay, cool." But if we go way back in the day, I was somebody. When it came to being academically, it just wasn't a fit for me. So I got kicked out of college twice, never went to university, and I was always happier working in a 9 to 5 job.
Okay.
Then DHL was pretty much a temp job, which then turned permanent. But I went from being a warehouse guy on, the conveyor belts to then becoming a supervisor in the warehouse. And the funny story with that, Paul, is I remember one day somebody came to the shutters asking if they could speak to the manager. At that point, I was just wearing a t-shirt and a high vis. And he said to me, "Excuse me, mate, can you tell me where the boss is?" And I was like, "You're talking to him." He was like, "Oh, you." And that was my first taste of first impressions count.
Okay.
Because, the day later, I then came in with the proper tie, shirt, high vis, and my badge. And when people and couriers came along, they came to me and they recognized me as the boss man,
Okay.
right? But if we fast forward, I then went to go work in local authority at Wandsworth Council, and I initially started off as just a photocopy boy. So my job was to look at forms for people claiming housing benefit and council tax benefit, to scan them and then put them onto their system so that the people could then assess. But whilst I was doing that, Paul, I would read the forms and the claim forms and then start to learn the process. And then one day there was an opportunity where they were ring fencing new roles for housing benefit. And truth be told, I was a 20-something-year-old. A majority of the existing housing benefit officers were quite senior.
Okay.
But out of 30 people, 4 were shortlisted, and that was me. And I then learnt and became a housing benefit officer. And the reason I did this was because I had no university degree or education. I kind of saw this as my getting a real job and getting some sort of education in life. But primarily my job was to interview the general public, understand their requirements, assess their finances, and see if they're eligible for, housing benefit and council tax help. But it was like the early days of being an SDR, but not knowing it, right?
But also painful, right, as well, because you're making decisions or asking questions based on members of society who aren't in the best position. So that must have been a tough role.
It was. And, part of that was because I like to help people. That's kind of how I've been most of my life.
Yeah.
But after 4 or 5 years of doing it, it really does burn you out because you hear some extreme circumstances where people are having tough times. And you have to be that person to turn around and sometimes be like, you're not eligible. And then where it got disheartening was, imagine I had a family that, I've been their officer, and then their younger children had then reached the age of 18 and they're coming in to claim benefits. And I would always sit there and think, well, what about uni, college, study, where do you want to go? And their honest response, which was true at the time, was, I'm actually better off on benefits. And it was a learned thing from family.
That's
and
a terrible situation to be in, but I understand,
Yeah, but it made sense. But that, for me, was just a bit tough to swallow. And hearing that day in, day out, just not cool. But, okay, so where does the tech side of this come into this? So Neil was a geek, and has always been, and something called the iPhone in 2009 came out, and I was absolutely geeked out by it.
Okay.
And working in the council with my managers and everybody like that, I just wouldn't shut up about the iPhone, and then Neil became the iPhone guy. And one day, a lovely gentleman who's a friend in music as well said to me, Neil, do you work for Apple? You must be on the commission list.
Okay.
And that's when something pinged in my head. Because my connotations of sales was cutthroat, stuck up, money hungry, narcissistic to an extent, and that just wasn't me. But I then took it upon myself to think, right, how does Neil become a salesperson? And because of the lack of the education and my imposter syndrome back then, I thought, well, I know how to work and I know how to step up. So I went to look for an admin job within a sales organization where I would see myself sitting next to the salespeople to hear and see what they do and how they do it. Did a couple of temping jobs and then joined a B2B publisher called Read Business. Was the finance guy dealing with all the billing and subscriptions. And then one day I went for a punt where I went to the sales director and said I'd love to get into sales. And he gave me an opportunity for 4 weeks as a telesales rep. Okay. So $120 a day, 2 hours call time, book 2 meetings per day minimum. Did it for 8 months, turned around to Jonathan and said, how do I become an account executive? And he then turned around and said, you're new and well done, mate. You're on a great path, but give it 3 to 5 years and you'll be there. And for me at that point, I was like, no, that's too long. And then fate would have it. I bumped into a recruiter who told me about a US startup called Zora. And she then turned around to me and Gabby said, you've probably never heard of us. And I said, actually, I have heard of it because I used to use it in finance.
Okay.
And she then turned around to me and said, would you like to become an SDR for a startup? But back then, Paul, I didn't really know what and this was 2012, I didn't know what an SDR meant.
Yeah.
I only knew telesales. So...
But you say that. So I think an SDR and BDR only really existed probably from 2010 onwards anyway. Before that, the account execs would do a lot of the call themselves. So I think that as we've seen, and you probably know this more better than I because of the SaaS work you've done, that we've actually segmented the sales cycle more nowadays than we have, and so we've automated as much as we can, outsourced some, etc. So I think the SDR back in the 2010s was probably the first time we saw that happen. So anyway, I interrupt you, mate. Sorry, carry on.
Yeah. No worries. And you're right, because I think the likes of Oracle, SAP, they were the guys creating the BDR, the enterprise BDR back then in that term.
Yeah.
So when I joined Zora, for a bit of context, our CEO was employee number 11 at Salesforce.com, and he was Mark Benioff's first CMO for Salesforce.
Wow, okay.
And Teen had this vision of something called the subscription economy, and it was kind of put to me, Neil, your job is to only speak to the C-suite, CFOs, CSOs, the whole C guys and girls, and book enterprise meetings to learn about Zora and help them transition from transactional business to subscription business. And our biggest competitors are Oracle, SAP, NetSuite. So finance was the world that I jumped into. And I was the first European SDR for Zora, and I was working with 4 account executives that were veterans from Oracle, SAP, SuccessFactors, and they kind of come over. But they'd already been doing tech sales for 10 years prior.
So these guys were big hitters anyway, right? Experienced enterprise, big ticket guys.
Yeah. So you had this young Neil who didn't know what the hell this was all about, what all these acronyms meant, and felt so out of depth and place. But if we fast forward 3 years after that, I then became like an SDR manager for a team of 15 across Europe, and we brought in 3.5 mil of closed business from outbound prospecting. That's kind of what we were great at.
Okay.
I then wanted to become an account executive, but Zora kind of said, well, if we promote you, and I understand it, we lose leadership and we lose revenue. So I was like, all right, cool. But I felt like I'd done as much as I couldn't, and I couldn't grow any further in that biz. So I then went into my next startup, which was Showpad in Belgium. Did the SDR gig for a bit, finally got promoted to an account executive, did it for about 1.5 years. I was average at best pool, but I realized I hated closing. I found being an account executive quite boring because for me, it was too transactional. Doing a demo, sending over a DocuSign, closing, dealing with stakeholders and stalls and all of that stuff. It was it wasn't my cup of tea.
So you're enjoying the most difficult part of the sales process. That's what you're saying, and you didn't like the most rewarding, which is closing, in some people's eyes.
Yeah, exactly. And somebody who coaches people that want to be AEs, like I have this chat with them, but everybody's motivated in different ways. So I kind of realized I was more interested post sale that did the customer attend the kickoff call. Is adoption and usage on point? Are they looking to add more licenses? So I used to chat to the CSMs and just say, what's going on with the account? I'm, interested to know. But the CSMs would always say, like, dude, we don't need the sales guy like Neil. We've got the relationship. It's fine. But I then got to a point where I was stuck 1 quarter and pipe was dry and all my deals just fell out. Then I had to have like a heart-to-heart with my VP of sales, a guy called David. And what I loved about David was I brought it up first, which was, Dave, I don't think I'm going to hit target this quarter and I'm worrying. And he said, I'm glad you brought up the topic and you've come to that realization, because for some people, Neil, there isn't a level of self-awareness. And I was like, all right, cool.
You're talking about Dave, is it Dave Dupre? Is that his?
Yeah,
okay.
Exactly.
I know Dave,
yeah. So Dave, like, I saw him as my sales dad back then. But with what he kind of then said to me was, I like you, Neil. You're a great person. You've got a lot of potential, and I understand you want to be this AE, and that was kind of your vision.
Yeah.
But sometimes we're not built for it. And I said, okay. And I said to him, what do you suggest? And David said, have you ever thought about customer success? And I looked at him almost offended and just said, I'm a hunter, not a farmer. Okay. What are you talking about? And then he said the most magical word or sentence, which was, in sales, you have to convince them to buy, but in customer success, you have to convince them to stay and spend more revenue.
That's quite powerful.
Yeah, he has a way with words, and he's done that quite a few times in my life. But he then encouraged me to go meet with a guy called Antoine Valentone, who was our CS leader, and he was ex-Salesforce as well.
Okay.
And we had the whole farmers and hunters and gatherers discussion, and he told me about, his commercial life and startups he's been in. But he just said, a lot of great AEs have then gone on to become great CSMs. But the challenge at Showpad at that time was the CS team were great, but they were more about making the customer happy. But as a business, they are also a revenue-generating business unit.
Yeah.
And we need to make money. So Dave kind of used me as the guinea pig where, okay, let's get a commercially minded individual, take them into customer success. But the advice he said is you have to take your AE hat off for a minute. You have to unlearn everything you've done and then relearn with the CS, but then combine it together. So I'm kind of getting to the point of, how does happy selling happen?
Yeah. Carry on. I've been following it through LinkedIn anyway, so I know where you're going.
All right. Thank you. So my role as a CSM was to train account executives, salespeople, SDRs on how to use a sales tool. And I would do this either face-to-face or on Zoom, and I would deliver the end-user training, say, ladies and gents, hope you enjoy Showpad, best of luck and happy selling was my catchphrase. But as soon as I closed the Zoom, I would always get emails from reps saying, Neil, we love the tool, it's great. But in your opinion and experience, how would you send a cold email? How would you handle this objection? How would you, and it wasn't called social selling back then, but how would you make meetings in the DMs on LinkedIn? And I'd be like, Paul, I don't get paid for this, but I'm happy to help.
Yeah.
But it happened so many times that it hit me in my head. And this was one of the variables of why I launched Happy Selling. But the main one was I could do this for myself and maybe launch a biz. So I did the craziest thing in my life. With our CEO's blessing, PJ and Louis, I said I'm resigning to launch my own consultancy in SDR training and SDR coaching. And that was in 2017. And, Happy Selling was born. But for the last 6 years, it's been one hell of a journey. But I had a passion for the prospecting piece. I had a passion for helping people that were new to the industry and helping them learn. And even today, as a founder of my biz, I'm still an SDR. Once you're an SDR, you never stop being an SDR. And I love it and I'm very passionate. But the why Happy Selling is my own experience of being in sales training courses like Medic, force management, Sandler training, all these great methodologies, spin, etc. But my gripe was I'd always be part of this training, and then it got to a certain point, Paul, where the trainers and leadership would say, you don't need to attend these sessions because these are more focused for the closers. And I'd be annoyed with that by saying, well, one day that's where I want to go, so why can't I join? I said, well, we haven't, it's not for you.
Okay.
And I found a lot of sales trainers, and this is just me, my personal gripe at the world.
Yeah.
A lot of sales trainers, their messaging and their value proposition was either focused at the C level of we can help you generate revenue. This is what the market's changing. This is what you need to do as a sales organization. And then the message filtered down to sales leadership of this is what your account executive is doing. This is how you build pipeline. This is how you close revenue.
Yeah.
And they went that way. So when I looked at Happy Selling, I was like, well, the SDRs and BDRs are one day going to be the future AEs or VPs of sales, customer success, or founders of their own business. So you need to invest and start there. So with Happy Selling, I went the other way. Let me focus on the SDRs, because if I make them great and happy sellers, they will book great pipeline that their A's can then close. If the closing A's have that, then the VP of sales have their revenue goals hit. If your revenue goals hit, it then impacts the business to be then successful. So my kind of ethos is you ain't got no lifeline if you ain't got no pipeline, and pipeline starts with your SDRs and BDRs.
It sounds like you've used that catchphrase before, Neil, but I'll let you get away with that. So the thing is, right, it's a challenging individual to coach because they're starting their sales journey, which means that if I'm training someone in Medic who's a senior account exec, they may have had 5 years training, and they've had Sandler training and Spin and Challenger, etc. So actually, training the Medic is going to be relatively easy. How do you teach someone who can literally be fresh out of university to be an SDR when they have no idea on how to sell and may have no idea on the technology either? That's a tough gig.
A tough gig, but I find it an easier gig versus training the seasoned vet, because with the seasoned vet, they are more ingrained with the way that they do it. And I found this with Happy Selling, where some company founders have asked if the A's could join my training, and the kind of caveat I give is this training is for your SDRs, the A's can join, but the thing I want to mitigate is Neil's teaching this methodology and then they challenge it and saying I don't see that working, and then the buy-in for the SDRs will be then harder to do.
Of course, I get that.
But the way that I've been able to handle that is by saying, Paul, that's great, that sounds really well, could you give me an example of how that's done? You would then teach me in that session, and then I would then flip it back and say, so how would you see this working for you? How would you tailor this in your style? So that's how I've handled it. But with, the new person fresh out of uni, I think that's the best place, because they are like a blank canvas and you're able to shape and mold them into the right way of thinking. But the challenge that the problem that I saw as being a former manager or being a sales leader is this is kind of what like onboarding looked like for a brand new SDR. It was a 2-week program. Week 1, it's here's a couple of demos, here's our product, here's our sales team, listen to a couple of calls, and you should be able to understand what we do. And then week 2 would be right, here are our sales tools like HubSpot, Lusher, SalesLoft, whatever you're using. These are our prospecting sequences. Here's the cold call script. Here's a book of accounts. Go do it. And what happens to that young individual is they're like a deer in headlights, and they're just like, what the hell? And then, a month later, you have the VP of sales scratching their head saying, I think we've got a mishire here. And why is the performance down? We gave them everything they need.
Yeah.
And I'm like, this is the way I've seen it. Onboarding successful reps is you got that 3-month period. So month 1 is you're trying to absorb as much as a sponge, and it's a lot of information. Month 2, you then start putting into practice what you've learned, but this is where you're going to fail a lot, and failure is fine because that's how we best learn. But then normally by month 3, either 2 things happen. The first one is it all clicks and you kind of figure out your flow and how to get this done. And then it's kind of like a self-perpetual engine kicking off, and then they start going off. Or you get to that 3-month mark and that person makes that realization that this isn't for them. This isn't what they expected it to be. And, it could be the end of the probation and you part way as friends.
That's interesting, right? Because a lot of organizations won't give a new hire, especially SDR, a 90-day realization training window before they start getting meetings, because I know that we've had an onboarding, in my opinion, is terrible in this industry. And I've worked for 15 companies and no one's got it right. And I think that getting people in like that has never worked if you're going to do such a short onboarding process. I'll tell you what worked well for me was, and I've used them a couple of times, with Pareto Law, because they do all the pre-screening, right? So we get some really good candidates in, very intelligent, multilingual, the best of breed or whatever, but then Pareto Law would train them. But you still had to do the onboarding, and what I'm talking about when I was at Proofpoint and what have you, that the onboarding was critical. I've got a question for you. So you migrated from. Let me reword this. You've got some. There's something about you that wants you to succeed and to grow and go further in your life and your business, right, or your career. You can tell that from your times at DHL and then moving into sales. But my question is, why sales? When you could have gone and done other stuff. You could have been a senior manager within civil service or whatever. Why sales? Why did you end up here?
It's a good question, because I didn't really think the why back then. I didn't really know, other than it seemed interesting and it was something I was curious about.
So it wasn't money then?
No. And I'll be brutally honest, and it's scared a lot of VPs of sales that I've worked with. I am not motivated by money whatsoever.
Okay.
I am more motivated by doing something that somebody else hasn't done, or perhaps people in my family haven't done, and being the first to do it. And over the years, I think initially when I got into sales, money, my, how much I was earning from working in a B2B corporate company into a startup, 2x'd my salary. And I was like, whoa, okay, this is wealth. And, back then I didn't understand how to manage wealth and pensions and savings, etc. So as a manager, within the first 4 weeks of onboarding, I gave them a 1 on financial intelligence, right? But then coming back to the sales piece, I've learned that it's improved my life in other facets. So I've become a better relationship builder with friends and family and people that I meet randomly at an event or something. In parallel, I was working in music as an MC rapper in nightclubs, and when approaching GMs, I had to put a proposal of my services and fees along with that, and I had to learn how to negotiate.
I was really hoping you were going to say then that as part of the proposal you'd record a rap for them. I was really hoping that would be if only.
If only. Yeah. But it then also helped me understand objection handling. So when you're pitching an idea to friends and saying, hey, do you want to go do this or go after this event, etc., like that, and you're always saying, I don't know, Neil. So I'd listen. I'd ask deeper questions as to find the root of the problem. I'd provide a solution, confirm they're okay with it, and then typically get my own way. I learned how to not manipulate, but be persuasive. And then also kind of what I learned being an SDR and an SDR manager, that an SDR isn't just an entry to sales. Being an SDR is an entry to a whole business, because I've met, managed and coached and trained a lot of SDRs that have gone on to become great marketeers, go into customer success, go into the product and fall in love with engineering. Because when I was at Zora, and it's a story that I've told loads and loads of times, but when I was taken to Foster City for my onboarding, I was the only British guy in a room of 20 other, Californians in Foster City at the at Crown Plaza Hotel. And our VP of Operations, Ben Kwan, turned round to us and said, why did you join Zora and what are you looking to do with your sales career? And he went round the room. One person said, I want a Rolex, President's Club. Another person says, I want to buy my first house. Another guy called Addison said he wants to buy his first Corvette and open a racing business, and he did that. But it came to me, and I felt so out of depth, Paul. I turned around and I just said, I want to be the CEO of my own company. And the room went silent, and Ben said, we need to have a chat. And I thought I was in trouble, but he turned around and said, that's the first time I've heard that in an onboarding. What made you say that? And I said, well, look, at Zora, the staff that work here were the same people that created eBay, PayPal, and launched a whole bunch of other startups of the businesses we use today now. I'm hoping some of that rubs off onto me. And he says, what do you want to be the CEO of? And I said, I don't know, but I think I'm in the right space that one day it will click. So when in 2017 the Showpad thing happened, and then I was like, so here it is.
Yeah.
That's what it is. It took 8 years, but that's where it is.
That's pretty cool. One thing you mentioned about the SDR role is that they can transform your career into other parts of the business. It's generally in this industry that we work in, tech industry, where SDR becomes an AE becomes a senior AE or account director, then becomes sales manager, sales director, VP of sales. That is typically where people want to be. And interesting enough, the two best SDRs that have ever worked for me are still SDRs today. They are phenomenal at their role, and they are very happy and being rewarded doing that. They have no, I don't even want to use the word ambition, because that's not right, because their ambition is to succeed in what they're doing, but they don't want to be a VP of sales, etc. One thing I've noticed in my career is that, and I'm assuming this is where you get your custom from, is no one has real time to coach people anymore. Everyone's too busy. Is that your sales line you use when you go in? Is it because people don't have time to coach people, or what?
It can be a mixed bag. So, I'm coaching anywhere between 30 to 40 SDRs or SDR leaders per week. And one of them, it could be that they don't have the time to coach, or they don't know how to coach and they mix coaching with managing. So a manager could be, you need to get these 100 dials in and you need to follow the script. That's directing and managing. But when, let's just say, Ricky, the SDR, approaches Paul and says, Paul, I had this response on an email, or here was a discovery meeting, can we just check it? And Paul's like, well, no, I'm building a business, dude, and I've got all these other reps to look after. It's because they don't have the time. Or it could be, well, I did it this way. I don't really know why he's doing it that way. And also, maybe I don't have the answers to his questions. So what sometimes happens is Paul, all right, Ricky, let's have a one-to-one on this on Thursday. He gets a Thursday, and then Paul's thinking, actually, I don't know how to answer this because I don't do that. Or maybe we could, Ricky, could we just maybe move this another week because I've got some other things I need to do. So it keeps being moved along.
Yeah.
And I get it.
I understand. I think researching for this interview, I looked at other coaching practices out there and people and stuff. I'm not convinced the quality of coaching out there is very good. Just by what people have said, the sort of individuals they are. I don't know what your interpretation of the industry is, but I haven't been that impressed.
I only know what I know, and that's working where I'm coaching at the minute. But to kind of give a bit of context to this, so before I got into the coaching biz, I was just doing sales training, and I was working with an outsourced biz dev agency where I trained about 80 of their SDRs. And then one day I got asked the question, do you do manager training? And I was like, no, I don't do that. That's not my bag. But I asked the question, like, what are you thinking? They said, well, basically, we've got these 6 individual contributors who have now stepped up into being sales managers and they're first-time sales managers. And I was like, okay. And they're saying to me, how could you help? And I said, well, I don't do manager training because there are better people at that than what I do. I just focus on the SDRs and I know I'm good at that. But we could set up like a 30-minute Zoom meeting with them all where they can just ask me as many questions. And because I've been a manager, perhaps I can answer those questions, right? And what I found, Paul, was I actually started enjoying that more because I didn't have to prepare a whiteboard presentation, training materials, etc. I just rocked up and just said, how can I help you? And then one day, Kevin Beals and Mark Akers, originally at Allego Refract, approached me at the back end of 2022 and said, Neil, we've moved on from Allego, it's been acquired and we're thinking about launching a new biz. And I was just like, tell me more. And they kind of said to me, Well, look, when we was at Refract slash Allego, we built a coaching technology software. And a lot of our customers would buy this to then use to coach their salespeople. But a lot of the managers kept going to them and saying, do you actually provide the coaching service alongside the software? And Kevin Mark said, we don't, because that's not what we do. So they identified that gap. So they kind of said to me, Neil, we'd love to pick you as one of the founding coaches. What do you think? And I was like, yeah, I'm fully in. But an imposter syndrome then hit, Paul, because I was like, I'm not accredited. I've not had any formal coaching training, etc. I've only just had the experience. And, you know, the first month I was so scared, and I was meeting all these salespeople and they're asking me all these questions. And at the end of it, I had coaching from one of the founders, and they said to me, they coached me. They said, so walk me through that call and tell me, like, what did you think about it? I said, yeah, it was great. You know, we topicked cold calling. We got this. We provided this screen. We agreed next steps.
Yeah.
And then he said, why are you showing this presentation? And it kind of feels like you're selling yourself. Why are you doing that? And I said, I don't know. It's just that's what I thought we do. And he asked me again, and I answered it truthfully. I said, I'm looking for validation that they trust me as their coach. And he's like, aha. So like an aha moment. And he says, why are you doing that? And I said, because I hope that they book again and, you know, they want to see, I just want to give them the best experience of coaching. And he said, yeah, okay, cool. And he said, you're kind of feeling like a bit like a trainer here, Neil. Would you agree? And I was like, yeah.
Okay.
That's what's happening. So, and admittedly, they had a whole bunch of other seasoned vet coaches as well. So you had like EVPs with 20 years of experience working in big tech companies, and you had ex-Sandler trainers that have been, you know, practitioners, like with OGM and everything and all of that. And there's Neil Buyan from Happy Selling that's been this startup kid for like a couple of years. I felt so out of depth. But the more I started speaking to them, the more I could see similarities of my career and my life, and them being more senior, more experienced. They've been in those shoes. But they were so humbling where they would say to me, I love how you handled that situation, or that's a great coaching question, or that's a cool piece of tech. I never thought about using Fathom to summarize my coaching notes and then send it to the coachee. And today, you know, we've got over 50 plus coaches from around the world. So my mindset is now, I don't like using the word expert. I don't define myself as an expert, because in my head, if I say I'm an expert, that means I've accomplished and I've got to the end and I know everything, and that would be boring. So my mindset is I am the student still. And when people ask me, like, Neil, how do you keep up to date with sales development and prospecting and techniques and all that? I said, it's the people I coach, they teach me. Because if you can imagine, Paul, being a solo trainer, I would only work with one company at a time. But now where I'm coaching, I'm working to 30 to 40 SDRs from different companies, different onboarding plans, different prospecting sequences, different cold calling openers. I learned that, and my learning curve has like really gone up.
How do you manage that?
And then I can
share. How do you manage your time? How on earth can you be effective working with that many different organisations? You think, oh, okay, today I'm putting this head on. This afternoon I'm putting this head on. That's tough.
It's what I learned as an SDR, so time blocking.
Okay.
You know, time management, and being very, you know, focused. So I know between this time and this time I'm coaching. So if somebody said to me, Neil, can you do a podcast on a Friday? No, because I'm doing my own. But let's get it done on a lunch break where I can give 45 minutes for it. So it's, you know, managing my time, but also I've had to be a bit more cutthroat. So, you know, back in the day, Paul, a lot of people would ask me for advice, or they want to jump on a Zoom. I'd be like, cool, that's how you know, the best way to help yourself is by helping others. But it's now got to a point where if somebody asks me for something, I ask this question. It sounds a bit conceited, but I say, and just imagine you reached out to me and said, could you help me with this now? I'd say, Paul, are you looking for free advice? Are you looking for paid coaching? And normally what you get out is, I'm just looking for a favor or free coaching. I'm like, great, totally understand that. I've got a lot of online content where you can get all of this. However, when you want to come into a paid session, let me know. So I've had to have boundaries, because as responsibilities have increased and, you know, my bandwidth has become more limited, I have to be very mindful of what I say yes to, and I'm learning to say no more. But what's the word?
That's a maturity thing, though, Neil. That's quite right, because you said earlier that you want to help people, and most salespeople do want to help people. They're not all the cutthroat people. They want to help, and some of them want recognition, but most of them want to help people. I can't remember the point I was going to make now. That's really annoying.
But being respectful of time and the maturity of like saying no.
Oh, exactly. So that's something that you I don't think you can teach. I'll give an example. And one of the issues or challenges we have in our industry is that, and I when I speak to CEOs of billion-dollar companies, there is no CEO training course. There is no sales director training course that teaches you to coach. There's a manager course that HR will run, which will tell you how to do performance reviews and how to work with HR and keep within employment law. But they won't say, have you thought about working like this? Or how do you actually coach someone rather than just teaching them to follow the medic rule? I think that's a massive gap. So I think so. I want to go off work for a little bit. I want to talk about this rapping, right? So I told my daughter last week that I was going to speak to you, and I said, "Oh, he does a bit of MCing on the side." She goes, "Oh, really?" So we quickly went on YouTube in the kitchen or whatever, and I said, "Here's the guy," and both of us were pretty stunned on how good you were. Honestly, really was, and I don't want that to sound condescending because it's not meant to. However, this morning I was trying to find you on YouTube and I couldn't find you, which was gutting. So tell me about that. How on earth does someone go from doing what you're doing to doing MCing on the side?
Really good question. So music has been with me since the womb, and what I mean by that is my mother is or was a classical Indian singer. So mum, you could sing 7 different Asian languages. She used to do Bollywood movies. And as a young kid, I was always on the road with mum for her concerts, like even Wembley, or travelling to other countries to recording scenes. That's pretty cool. Thank you. But as a young kid, back then I was like, this is mum and work. And I just used to get really annoyed with it. But I had an element of musicality. And I remember even in my bedroom when I was younger, like I would have cassette tapes that I'd buy from Woolworths. And I'd pretend to be like a disc jockey.
You're not that old, are you? Cassettes from Woolworths?
I'm 40 this year.
Okay.
So
that's the end of Woolworths. I remember the beginning of Woolworths, but there we go.
But like Al Price and all of that.
Yeah, okay.
So I used to love pretending to be on the radio and being the host. And I used to love listening to tape packs and then writing the lyrics so I could actually say what they were saying in the lyrics. And then in my teens, UK Garage was the sound. So my sister was 6 years older and I learnt about jungle and drum and bass. And I remember she used to have flyers all over her room, and I see things for, One Dance, Roast, One Nation, the Rat Pack, Back to 95 and all of that sort of stuff. So I used to listen to a lot of things. But then Garage came along and that was my teen sound, and that's what we would hear in high school. But in high school, we used to have our Walkmans and Discmans. And it would be like, have you heard this new tune from So Solid? Or did you listen to the Pirate Radio with this set on it and stuff like that? And So Solid for me was a group from South London, which I was a big fan. Back then you was either the Heartless Crew from North London or you were So Solid Crew from South London. Those are the two rivaling gangs.
I never knew
Not
that.
gangs,
I never knew that. Yeah. Okay.
But I was a So Solid kid. And I used to listen to the So Solid Crew and like Romeo, the one that does that 21 seconds, all of that. And what would happen in high school, like in the playground or, when we was at the youth club, we would have a pair of decks, we'd have the microphone, and we would emulate our favourite MCs and DJs and pretend to be them, which then turned into our friends having birthday parties at the local rugby club where they said, right, we want this DJ, Neil, we want you, and my MC name was Sny B. And I'd do it, and it was just for fun.
Yeah.
But I used to love just anybody that I didn't go into battle people or to compete, but I used to love sitting with the other MCs and hearing them do lyrics and then take my turn ciphering on the microphone.
Yeah, it's not quite 8 Mile, but in terms of trying to beat each other up, but yeah, okay.
There were 8 Mile moments, don't get me wrong. Okay. Sometimes you'd find another bunch of MCs and all of that jazz. But anyway, I think I got to my, around the 18 mark, and I was with a girlfriend at the time. And all of that just stopped because it was just like focus on the relationship and love, and music kind of got let go. But in my early 20s, went through a breakup, was depressed, and an old DJ friend who did Pirate Radio, he reached out to me and said, Neil, you need to get out your drum. Do you want to come to the studio? So I went to the studio and I'm there heartbroken and just depressed and everything. And then I'm seeing him DJing and he's hosting the show on Pirate Radio. So when you think about those tower blocks and all that, it was exactly that.
Okay.
So kind of Corrupt FM. That's kind of the vibe we were in.
Okay, yeah.
But Chris, he was a really good friend. He was actually a software engineer, but in the evenings he was a DJ, a bedroom DJ. And with Chris, he would invite me every week, and he was being a really good friend. And then one day he said, "Neil, didn't you used to MC? Do you want to have a go on the microphone?" I was like, "Nah, I don't do that anymore, mate."
Okay.
But after a Stella or two, you know, you get a bit confident. You're like, "Yeah, all right, let's have a go." And you know, I got into it.
It's always Stella.
Yeah, and there was a genre called, so you had UK garage. UK grime was very hard, you know, dark and everything, and that wasn't my flavour. I was more into uplifting, housey type beats.
Okay, yep.
But then there was a genre called UK funky came around, where it's kind of similar to UK garage, and that's what I used to MC to. So that then moved on to me going to my first ever bar in Dartford called Crush, and I went with Chris, and that was my debut. And I remember being in the DJ box, crouched down on my knees and on the microphone doing my thing, and Chris turned around to me and he said, "Neil, what the hell are you doing down there?
Yeah.
Get up." And I said, "I'm too scared, mate." And he said, "Neil, stand up and look at what's..." And when I just stood up, the crowd were like just going off on it. And I was like, "Oh, they like it." So that then turned into one day doing another set elsewhere in my local town. And there was an old Chicago's nightclub bar just up the road. And one day I went down with Chris, and we were seeing who would be considered his rival as a DJ. They're friends now. But we went to go study his set. That's what Chris was really good at. He would study other DJs. And something within me just thought, and I just went up to the DJ, and his name was DJ KGB, who's one of my besties and a godfather to my son Carl. And I said to him, "I'm an MC, can I have a go on the microphone?" And I know how annoying that is for a lot of clubs and GMs when the outsider from, you know, the guy in the crowd says, "Oh, let me have a go on the mic, mate." And I did the same to him, and he just said, "Sorry, mate, management don't like MCs. It's not really that sort of thing." And I looked around the room and it was dead. And I said, "Mate, there's nobody here. Give me 10 minutes. And if you don't like me, you can tell me to sling my hook." So he said, "All right, go on." 2 hours later, we've gone back to back on so many garage classics. He turned around and he said, "You got something there, mate. Come back next week and you got a job." And I was like, "Sweet, cool."
Wow, okay.
And that was the beginning of it. But it turned out that he was the sound engineer and one of the producer helpers for DJ Luck and MC Neat, one of my big idols. So Carl took me under his wing, and that's kind of when I got introduced to the garage family. So, you know, MC Creed, Pied Piper, DT, these are all friends and people that I know now, and I've got to perform with.
I never knew this, Neil. I never knew, honestly.
Yeah, but I think the moment where I kind of said, I didn't think I made it, but I thought I got to a good point, was I was at the O2 Arena doing the Iron Apple reunion for 2011, and you can find it online as well for Curiosity Group. And I was in front of 2,500, 3,000 people in a crowd. I'm on the stage with MC Skibbity and MC Det, and I've got the microphone. I went, "Ollie, Ollie, Ollie," and 3,000 people back went, "Oi, oi, oi," and I was like, "Yeah, that there, you can't buy that feeling."
Of course,
and
yeah.
Thereafter, I toured with DJ Luck and MC Nate and all the crew. Really became good friends with them. And yeah, but then I became a dad, so that all stopped because I literally did live a rock and roll lifestyle. So if you can imagine being an enterprise BDR for Zora 5 days a week, and then on Friday evening till Sunday evening, I was doing 3 or 4 gigs, or 5 gigs a weekend, and I did that for about 6 years. And at one point, I even had 2 jobs. I did that, and then I was working part-time in the evening at Pizza Hut as a delivery boy. And yeah, had my son, took a break, tried to get back into it, but kind of realised it wasn't what it was. So now I do the occasional event when a DJ mate or an MC mate says, "Neil, can you do us a favour? Do you mind coming down?" I'm like, "Cool, fine. As long as you sort my drinks and, you know, give me a rider, I'm happy." But nowadays it's more, I focus on music production. So I'm learning how to make music, because I've kind of got to a point where the music I hear on the radio now is great, and there's a lot of great producers and artists out there, but I'm like, I don't like that bit. I don't like this bit.
That's interesting.
So rather than moan about it, do something about it, and I've started to learn, to make music. So hopefully, that's where the whole MC story comes from. Sorry if I've gone on.
No. I love the story. I never realised that you had those sort of level of connections and actually spent that much time MCing in front of all those people. So it's a shame you don't do it anymore, really. But there we go. There we go. So look, just a few questions. Any career mistakes you've made? Anything you did that you thought, "Do you know what, I shouldn't have done that"?
That's a really good question, and I've
You
thought
don't have
about
to
this
name that. You
question.
don't have to name the company, by the way, Neil.
Yeah. That's fine. I've thought long enough because this came up in because I do a lot of self-reflection and journaling, and let me tell a story. When I was working at Zora, our CEO Teen Zoe, he visited the London office, and I remember sitting there and Teen was talking about the sprint to 100 million, the vision of us
Yep.
IPOing one day, and we did it. And I asked the weirdest question to Teen, and I said to him, Teen, if you weren't doing Zora and Mark Benioff didn't give you that 50 million to launch us, what do you think you'd be doing with your life? And he says, I don't think about it. And he said, that's not really the best question, Neil, but I can't fathom any other life other than what I wanted to do.
Okay.
And where I'm going with this is mistakes aren't really mistakes. I think everything is ordained the way it's supposed to happen and everything pans out the way it is. So if I was to have changed anything in my career or my life, I wouldn't be where I am today.
Yeah.
However, there have been big learning curves, where I think if we go back to like periods in time, management, when I was promoted to a manager, I let that go to my head and it really hit my ego, where I thought, all right, I've earned my stripes. I'm the boss. You're the team. You perform. And I became a horrible micromanager.
Okay.
I would have hated myself if I was my boss, right?
Yeah.
And I had to really humble myself to my team and kind of approach them in the sense of, I just want to help you. Where do you need the help? And then following that, I also then became a people pleaser. So I took on the moniker by Gary Vaynerchuk, which is your team don't work for you, you work for them. So I then was doing everything for them, their sequences, their presentations, replying to their objections, helping them prep for the promotion. I did it all, and I burnt myself out mentally and physically doing so. So I then came to the ethos of, you do not work for me, I do not work for you, we work together. And that's why I don't believe in hierarchy or power lines. Obviously, there's structures within companies, but I don't like having to report to somebody. I don't like having to, tell people off and put them through a pip and like that. So I have also come to the realization that I can do management, but I really don't enjoy management. But being an independent coach where I have no agenda to the company or their revenue targets, but to the individual, that's where I'm best suited. So I think it's taken years of knowing where I'm good and what I'm not good at, but also not being too hard on myself.
So you mentioned some interest in there because you're not held to any. Or I'm not saying you're not held to accountability to your clients, but how do your clients measure the success that you bring?
Really good question, and it's a very hard thing to quantify when people are looking for a coach in business, because people will expect results, etc. And it's kind of the same way that I pitch with happy selling. So, when clients or prospects say, what results can you guarantee? And time again, I've said, zilch, zero.
Yeah.
I cannot guarantee anything. And they look aghast at me, just like, well...
Nice bit of honesty for a change.
Yeah. But they look at me in aghast and say, well, what kind of sales trainer are you, dude? I'm like, well, look at it this way. I'm kind of like your PT in the sales gym. I can show you how to bench. I can show you how to curl. I can even show you a nutritional plan. However, I cannot be the person that does that reps, and I cannot eat that plan. That's down to you, and that's something I can't really control. However, people that have followed this PT prospecting plan for Neil have typically seen these type of results, because the other side that I cannot, control is their ICP and their industry and their prospects and their personas. I'm not having those calls. But what I have found with people that I'm coaching is the mistake I had early days of coaching was I was trying to ensure that I delivered the goal that I wanted to do in that session. So my goals were they got the cold call script, or they booked the meeting and got this and etc. And I found that I was wrongfully deeming the value of that session. And a good learning curve for me was, from my coaches, is I'm not the one that determines the value. It's the person that booked the meeting with me. So, at the end of the session, I would ask questions such as, did you find what you were looking for in this call today? And they will then say, yes. I've then learned to take further, how do you see this helping you today? And when they can explain to me, I now know where I'm going wrong with my sequences or my time management. I can now see I'm not actively listening into that call. This has really helped me. Neil, then I know that the value has been delivered because they're the ones that define it. But again, with coming into the new year, I did over 600 coaching sessions last year. I have an average Uber rating of 9.8 out of 10 from most of my coachees. I have regular people that come back week after week after week. But what made me really happy was second week of Jan, 5 reps that I'd coached previously. One of them was on a PIP 6 months ago, and he's smashed his January target and was already on target for February. 2 other people had got their promotions into the account executive role. And another gentleman, I think I can mention his name because he put it on LinkedIn. He was a 40 plus something dad of 2. He used to work in call centers as a call center manager. This was his first SDR gig for first year.
Yeah.
And he hit President's Club. And I was like, freaking A, dude, congrats.
Yeah.
And seeing people win, and it's something that I've learned when I'm coaching SDRs, when they say, career-wise, where do you want to go? And I think it's really hard for a 20-something coming out of uni to know what their career is. But some people say to me, they're either thinking the AE route or the leadership route, and they say, what would you do in your opinion? And I said, I've been both, but here's my realist, honest advice. If you really want to make a lot of money, and you're money-driven, and you want to have nice things, and you want to accomplish X amount of capital, being an individual contributor and an account executive is probably best where you're suited.
Yep.
However, if you're not really money by the money and the status, but you love helping people and seeing them grow, then perhaps management is better for you. But no, you could potentially earn less as a manager, but you may be more fulfilled by helping people. So to answer your question, what can you guarantee with coaching? There's nothing, because it's in the hands of the person you're coaching if they execute it or not.
Fair comment. What does the future hold for you then, Neil?
Ooh, that's a very good question. I don't know, is the honest answer. And a lot of people say to me, Neil, what are you doing next month? What are you doing this year? And I'm like, I still don't know. I've learned to be more present in the moment. So let's just say, here's a prime example. Neil, I'd love to come you on the podcast. And I'm like, cool, let's book it in for this time. I have no idea what's in my calendar for next week until I get to Monday morning where I'm planning. I'm like, oh, so I got a podcast this week. Oh, I've got coaching. Oh, I'm going off for a dinner. I like living like that now because I think the mantra that I've learned through, therapy and journaling and whatnot is you cannot have one hand on the past and one hand on the future and be present. The future has not happened. The past cannot be changed. The only time is now. So I would say all I would ask for is another 24 hours to live.
Just 24 hours?
Yeah. I pray for another 24 hours every time I go to bed.
Fair play. We're running short of time now. So do you want to tell us about your podcast and your YouTube, what they're called, what does it contain, what it's all about?
Cool question. I'll keep it short, sweet and brief. So you can find happyselling.io on all socials, TikTok, Insta, LinkedIn and whatnot. So the podcast is designed for people that are just coming into tech sales and interested to know what an SDR is. Or perhaps they're in the SDR gig and they're still first year and they want to hear from other SDRs that are in the same boat. So they will get insights onto why did you get into sales? What have been your learning curves? What's your story? And what advice would you give to a younger version of yourself? This has been a podcast for 3.5 years. It became a YouTube video show as of 2 years ago. I never really had any goals or numbers, but it's hit over 95,000 downloads in 70 countries.
Wow.
And a CEO asked me last year, what you're looking to do with the podcast? And I was like, just keep going. That's the goal.
Do you know what's interesting? When I first started doing this last year, I read loads of stuff up and it said, if you do 4 or 5 podcasts, you've made it. Because typically people who do 1 or 2 and then they stop.
Yeah.
So don't get me wrong, I've taken 6 months off in between season 1 and season 2, but at least now I've got my 10 people for season 2, which is good. So at least we'll get that done, right? Which is good.
100%. And could I just add on to that for 30 seconds? Thank you. You're right, because when I launched my podcast shortly after, I saw a load of other people launching their own versions. Yeah. And again, I didn't see it as competition, but I did notice that after, episode 3 or 4, I never saw anything from them. And this is very time consuming and this is very hard work. Yeah. And that's why I have to do it in my spare time. And the other piece is, taking breaks is fine. There have been points where I've not been able to afford to do my show because I used to have help with it as well. There have been times where life is happening and my kid comes first in everything, where I've taken 3 or 4 months off from doing my podcast. But I never have said, this is the end of the show, or I don't know when we're coming back. It's just, we're not doing anything right now. Hopefully in the future it will, and I'll do it when I can. So I get that stress.
That's cool. Last question for you, Neil. What advice would you give to someone who wants to go and start their own thing like you have?
Go do what I did, which is draw 4 columns on your whiteboard, and don't try and complete this in one night. But in column 1, write what do you love doing. In column 2, write what do you like doing and brings you energy. Column 4, write things you can do, but you're not really too happy doing it. And then in the 4th column, write what do you hate doing. And sit with that for about 4 to 6 weeks. So put it on a piece of paper and maybe write one thing a day, walk away from it and come back.
Okay.
And what you'll then come to is a realization of what is your passion, like Ikigai. You'll know your passion, vocation, what the world needs. And I realized I love helping people. I love performing. I love seeing people grow. I hate management. I hate dashboards. I hate KPIs. And I don't like being a manager.
Yeah.
And it was, I kind of the arching title when I finished that exercise was, I want to be the Jay Shetty for SDRs. And that's kind of my mission at the minute.
That's a great thing to finish on, Neil. I love that. That's really good. I want to thank you for your time. We've gone a little bit over time, but I really appreciate the conversation and to give me some personal insights into you and your career and what you've done. So I wish you every success, my friend. And thanks for coming on the show.
Thank you, sir, and happy selling.
Take care.